Greetings friends! Today I'm just making a quick video to show this project I'm working on. So you may know that I made my little courtyard drawing from a vision I had. I drew this little courtyard, and last week I was doing some rough storyboards for a completely different project that had to do with a rubber duck. So I drew out a bathtub. I didn't need the bathtub in the final piece, but I drew it out to help get things going. And I liked the way it looked so much that I drew an entire scene around that bathtub. And I ended up with a background. Then I had the idea to mix the bathroom and the courtyard together. So my idea is to create like a little short piece that's a slice of life type animation. I'm really interested in trying to do something like that lately. So I'm gonna try and do that with this bathroom scene and the courtyard and figure out, I think I wanna make like a kitchen next and put that in there, and then maybe one or two other rooms, settings within that. Obviously I have the courtyard, so I need to figure out what animation to put in there. But today I'm working on the bathroom scene. And I drew out this little character. I don't know if I'll use this character in all the scenes or if it'll be like a family or something. I haven't figured that out yet. But I'm working on the bathroom, and I did very rough animation in Photoshop last night, and then today I went to go do another pass, but I decided to try using the program Animate, which is another Adobe program. I think it's maybe what Flash turned into, but I've never used it before, and I never so I don't have the hang of it or anything, and that fact kind of kept me from even trying, because most of the time it's like, well, I need to get this done, so I'll just use the software that I'm already used to. But today I thought maybe I would try using Animate. So far, I have used it a little bit. So far, it's working out okay. Definitely got to get used to it, but the nice thing is that I can import a file and have a layer of reference that won't be included in the onion skin settings, which is something that I was having trouble with in Photoshop, because I would have one pass of the animation and I would want to reference only the specific frame from that pass, use the onion skin to view frames from the current pass that I'm working on, so that I can match up the new pass, the nicer looking version, still sketch, but to try and, make sure that everything is a little more consistent between like how big is the head, how big where is everything in space, is my character shrinking over time or getting too big, or is it working out okay? So that I was having trouble with in Photoshop. The way that I'm doing it in Animate right now is working pretty nicely for me. So anyway, yeah, this is just a video that a little video putting together to kind of show me learning how to use Animate. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any ideas or requests for what else I should put in this little slice of life animation, whether it's different settings or different actions the characters could be taking, let me know. And that's it. Thank you. So I think that when I said this was going to be a little video, I was a little bit lying or else mistaken, because this video is much longer than I thought it would be. And this whole process of creating this animation, man, when you screen record things and you get to see how many screen recordings you have and how long each of them are, that really puts it into perspective for you, just how long it takes you to do something. So, it's a learning process though, because I'd never used Animate before. And a lot of what you're watching right now is just me figuring out how to even use the program to begin with. So I had to figure out how to start a project. And then because I had the rough animation that I exported from Photoshop here as a video file, I was trying to figure out how to import that into Animate. and well, to figure out if I could, which I could. So once I figured that out, then it was smooth sailing. Just kidding. Then I had no clue how to create my frames and start actually making the animation inside of Animate. So I had to figure that out as well. But I mean, once you get the hang of it, it's actually a pretty decent like workflow. So, well, yeah, I guess the point of this video for me, and the point of adding narration to this one, is to give you my perspective of what it was like to use Animate. Comparing it to my previous experience of working with Photoshop to do this kind of work. So, one thing that's really nice about Adobe Animate is that it's meant for animation, right? Photoshop has some animation capabilities, but it's not an animation program. Now, of course, you could argue the true value of Adobe Animate as well, since I feel it's not per se industry standard software, but it's still useful, in my opinion. And, you know, part of the reason I decided to try using it is because I have access to all of the Adobe Creative Cloud, so I may as well be using all the apps that I'm paying for, or at least trying it out. And with Animate, because it's intended for this kind of animation, using the frames is so much better than in Photoshop. So the way that it works in Animate, you can kind of see, you'll be able to see more throughout the video, but each drawing is held until the next drawing or the next frame that you set. So you can see these white thumbnails with my drawings on them in the timeline down there. And then in between that is this gray space. And that gray space is where that drawing gets held until the next frame is set. Whereas when you're animating in Photoshop, Photoshop doesn't do that. At least not when you're using video layers. And most of the time when I animate in Photoshop, I'm using video layers. I started to dabble in using regular layers with my animation within Photoshop, actually at the start of this project, but overall, I mean, there's pros and cons for both, I think, which, like I said, is what I'm going to talk about. But if you're using video layers in Photoshop, for example, like really there's two different ways, about two different ways that I can think of for how to do your animation in Photoshop. If you're doing a video timeline and not frame animation, which if you're not working and doing this stuff in Photoshop, you don't need to worry about that. We can just talk about two ways to animate in Photoshop, which are using video layers. Like I said, this is how I usually animate in Photoshop. In fact, I did my animation thesis film this way. And when you have a video layer, each drawing will last for one frame and that's it. So the next frame will be blank unless you put something on it. You don't get that hold. So normally I am animating at 24 frames per second, and I like to animate on twos. So that means each drawing will last for 2 frames. So you can think about it as it being like actually 12 frames per second, but there is a difference between animating on ones at 12 frames per second and between animating on twos at 24 frames per second. Because if you want to switch between twos and ones, you can only do that at 24 frames per second. if you animate on ones at 12 frames per second and then render the video out at 24 frames per second, you're going to get the same effect as rendering or as animating only on twos at 24 frames per second, because you take that one frame at 12 frames per second and you're rendering it out at 24 frames per second, so each frame becomes 2 frames now. But if you wanted to have something animate on ones, you can't do that if you're working in 12 frames per second and rendering at 24 frames per second, because every frame is going to become 2 frames. If you start working in 24 frames per second and animate on twos, then anywhere that you want to just switch to animating on ones, you can do that, and it's not an issue. It's not going to mess anything up in the render. But if you're working in Photoshop with video layers, in order to animate on twos and actually have those drawings held for 2 frames, my options, and anyone's options, are either to basically just copy paste those frames. So like you can duplicate, I think there is a duplicate frame option. But as far as I know, there's no default keyboard shortcut for that. So you'd have to create your own. Otherwise, you have to keep going into the menus. Oh my God, that's such a hassle. So it's either that or copy paste. And the problem then arises if you need to make changes. And really that's the main problem overall for both ways that you could do it with video layers. So the other way, and the way that I usually do, is to create my animation on the one video layer, and then I would just duplicate it and offset it by 1 frame. So basically the original layer would be like drawing blank, drawing blank, drawing blank. And then the duplicated layer is effectively blank, drawing, blank, drawing, blank, drawing. So they're alternating. So that way you get that hold effect. But again, if you want to make changes with the duplication, like duplicating frames on the same video layer, then you have to delete those frames, make your changes, reduplicate anything, everything, whatever. Doing it as 2 separate layers, then yeah, I need to delete that duplicated layer, make my changes, and then reduplicate and shift. Which, yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world. But then the other problem that you get with that is now you have 2 layers for the animation, and that adds up over time, especially because I like to have my line art as 1 set of video layers, and then I'll have the color as at least another set of video layers. Usually I might even have like 3 or 4 sets with the colors, just kind of depending on what I'm working on, and if I'm doing shading, which is another thing, which I'll talk about later when it comes to Animate. Yeah, then it adds up very quickly. So that's using video layers. Now, you want to talk about adding layers up very quickly. The other way to animate in Photoshop is to just use regular layers. So you could have a regular layer and have it hold for 2 frames, because a regular layer is not going to change. Basically, you set the duration for how long that static image should last, and it will be on screen that entire time. So in that way, you can have that hold. You can have a layer that lasts for 2 frames, and it will show in both frames. But those layers add up quickly. So this bathroom animation, for example, I think it's about 11 seconds long, but let's say even if it's 10 seconds. We're at 24 frames per second, but we're animating on twos. So we get 12 drawings per frame. So 12 drawings for 10 seconds, that's 120 drawings. Even if you are doing this on twos, that's 120 layers. And that's just for 1 pass. And that's just for one thing. Like if you're only doing the line art, that's 120 layers just for the line art. So that's a lot. So that's why I prefer to use the video layers, because maybe in some ways they're less workable, but they're more manageable when you're trying to scroll through the timeline. Honestly, even in Animate, the layers can add up kind of quickly, and there's never enough space on your screen, even though I'm working with like a 16-inch graphic tablet. I think it's about that size. So it's not a small screen, but with the amount of screen real estate that gets taken up just by like those timeline controls, that top bar there, and then also showing all the times and stuff like that, that takes up like half of the timeline, and then I only have room for 2 layers to view. And you can see that I kept my right sidebar closed for the most part, unless I needed to access some of those settings, because otherwise I felt like I would have no room to actually draw. So even in Photoshop, this is an issue. Navigating layers, oh boy, it gets rough. So I'd rather not create individual layers for each frame, if possible. I mean, it's doable. Again, so the thing is, before I started animating in Photoshop, doing my digital hand-drawn animation, I actually worked with GIMP. So like for the final project for my intro to animation class, I did a short. It's called He's Asking for It. And I drew everything out in GIMP. And the thing about that is GIMP doesn't have a timeline feature, or at least it didn't when I was using it. I haven't used it in a while now, so I don't know what it's like anymore. But it didn't have a timeline feature when I was using it. So I drew each frame as an individual layer, and then I had to export all of those individually, separately as PNGs, and then assemble that in Premiere. And I did some like additional keyframing in Premiere as well, because I had like in the very beginning, there was a part where it was like, it's not worth it for me to like redraw this 100,000 times. Not 100,000. It was probably like, I think it was about like 5 seconds long. So let's say like 60 times. I'm like, it's not worth it for me to like draw this out and save this out as PNGs. I can just draw my little character as a top-down perspective. I can just draw the circle that indicates my character and then have it move in Premiere. So much quicker. So at least I don't have to do that in Photoshop. Because even if you're drawing all your frames as separate layers and it gets complex, we can still export as a video, and then you just have one file. Very nice, very nice. Especially if you're not planning on doing any kind of compositing afterward. Like I think there was one animation that I did last year that once I was done with it in Photoshop, I just saved that out, and that's what I uploaded to places. I might have converted it in Media Encoder, but I don't really see why I would have done that, because usually I'm using either MOV or MP4, and you can export as both of those from Photoshop. So I think I only use Photoshop. Well, the point is that having the ability to just make a drawing, and then the program will say, we're going to have this last until the next drawing. And it's all on one layer. Beautiful. That's a thing that I really like about Animate. That and the onion skin stuff. So in Photoshop, in my experience, if you're using the onion skin feature, that's great. Unless you only want one thing onion skinned and nothing else, because it's gonna onion skin everything. So like I have a background here you can see, and this was just the background that's visible right now is part of the rough animation video. So I like set the background to a lower opacity and just rendered it out with the background. I do eventually bring in the background separately within Adobe Animate. But that you'll see later on in the other videos in this series, which you can watch if you support me over on Patreon. All tiers will have access to those videos, as well as other behind the scenes and early access to videos like this and other exclusive fun things. So feel free to check that out. Those videos, I think there's like going to be 3 other videos that will show the rest of my process for doing this particular animation. Those videos I won't do narration on. They're just going to be my speed drawings, but I will also keep you updated on further progress for this this project altogether. I do have a couple of sketches for the next environment, which is a kitchen. But you don't want to hear about that right now. You want to hear about the onion skinning problem. So yeah, I have this whole thing set to a lower opacity. So if I did that in Photoshop and put my onion skin on, that background's going to become opaque again because it's doubling up in the viewport with the onion skin. And that gets so frustrating. Plus, so here what I'm doing is I have my really rough pass and I just kind of did a stick figure to start with. And then here I'm roughing it out a little bit more. Then I go through and do a couple of more passes. So I had a pass that after this was again refining the shape of everything and sizing and making sure things were consistent. And that I actually did all of the limbs as separate layers to help me keep track of things. So like I have a layer for the torso, a layer for right leg, right foot, left leg, left foot, left arm, right arm, the neck, the head, the hair, and the towel that the character is wearing. And I kept all of those separate and set each one to individual colors. I mean, like the feet are the same color as the legs. But each leg has a separate color. Each arm has a separate color. And that was really to help me in the final pass when I'm doing the line art to figure out, okay, which arm is the left arm? Oh, this one's the left arm, this one's the right arm, and the left arm is in front of the character right now. So that I need to draw on top, and the behind the stuff, yes, the arm that's behind the character I don't need to draw. Because I like to have that information there, because otherwise it's hard for me to visualize, or it's hard for me to figure out if I've gotten the like anatomy right. I'm like, is this right? So I need to kind of show where that arm is behind the character in my sketches, but obviously in the line art I don't want that. And if everything's the same color, it gets confusing. And honestly, even with it not being the same color, at some points I still got confused, I think. Or maybe it was just when I was doing those separate shape layers, I got confused because I hadn't done it earlier. So went through that, and then went through the line art phase, and then duplicated my line art layers. So with the line art, I ended up with just one layer for all of the body stuff, one layer for the hair, one layer for the towel. So then I duplicated those and did my color within the line art. I can talk about that later. But those are the passes that I did. And especially in this early stage, because the rough animation that I did in Photoshop was really just setting my key poses. And then what I'm doing here now is drawing over those key poses. I'm refining what I had before and making sure that things look good, but also needing to add those in-betweens And so it becomes really important, I would say, in this pass and in the next pass where, again, I'm drawing out just basic shapes, but I'm still refining things. It's nice to be able to see this frame from the last pass that I went through, and also to be able to see the previous frame and or next frame of the current pass, but not being able to see last and next frames of the previous pass that I did. So because that gets even more confusing because then I'm like, which frame is it from? What is it doing? Is it from the past? Is it from the future? Is it from the now? Who knows? So to be able to have, and in Animate, it seems that as long as you've locked a layer, it won't show up in the onion skin. Like, that is so incredible to me. It's so helpful. And like, I don't know, maybe I've honestly never tried to, I don't think I've ever tried doing the lock layers thing in Photoshop when it comes to onion skinning. So maybe it works, but not in my experience. So to have this ability in Adobe Animate for me is one of the biggest pros to doing the work here, because I want to make sure that I'm getting my drawing, I need to refine it based on the last pass that I did, but I want to make sure that I'm staying consistent in my current pass. So I have to be able to see one frame from the last pass, but I also need to be able to use my onion skin for the current pass. And Adobe Animate has given me that ability. So it's great for that. What is it not great for? Or at least I can talk about some of the things that I did struggle with in this program. So I think at this point, after really only having done one small project in here so far, there are two things. It's always two things with me, I guess, maybe because I'm a Libra, so I'm all about balance. I don't know. But two things that I can think of that were the major struggles for me with doing this in Animate. And some of this might just be part of my learning curve, and some of it might just be my own personal problems. But the first thing that I'll say is the brush. Now, I didn't really mess too much with the brush settings overall, really until I got to my coloring layer. I'll talk about that later. But for the most part, kept it at the default, maybe changed the size a little bit. So it's just a round brush, like it's just a circle. The thing that I noticed, well, first of all, like this one might be on me, but it was a little bit difficult to control sometimes. I felt like, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. It's like I felt I couldn't get my lines to be what I wanted them to be. Now, I think the smoothing is on, like at 100%, which in some parts was nice. Sometimes it helped me, but then other times I felt like no matter how well I actually drew the line, the line came out really like squiggly and weird. So maybe maybe that's just a computer thing and not the program, or I don't know, but it didn't seem to always help. And then sometimes it felt like it would it would mess up what I drew in some parts. So that could be frustrating. And keeping things consistent is always difficult. So at least for me. So again, that partly could be a me problem. But yeah, I didn't really mess with any of the settings, mostly because so much of my effort in this went into like just getting used to using the program to begin with. So now that I've done that, I think that next time when I go to animate the kitchen scene, because I'm thinking that for the kitchen, I'll take the same approach. I'll make the background in Photoshop, and then I'll do my animation in Animate, and I'll probably start the animation in Animate instead of Photoshop like I did before. But we'll see. Because I do like, here's the other thing. I do like having all my custom brushes in Photoshop. Because so here it's like the line is so samey. Even if I'm not sure that I have pen pressure on, but I think I must, because at some points where it messed up, the line would be like like a huge glob in one place and then kind of lessen. So I think I maybe did have pen pressure on, but I just was applying the same pressure all the time. I don't know. But having like more custom brushes. So in Animate, at least I know there are a few different brush types. And like I said, I just really use the default brush settings. So I might mess around with some of the other options that are available now that I've got a hang of how the program operates and I don't have to focus on that. I'll do some more experimentation with the brush tool and see, again, what all of my different options are and if there's something that works better for me in there. But I do, because it's all kind of, I don't know, it seems like it's computer based. So it's like you're drawing and then the computer's interpreting that. I don't know if I can get any texture with the brush like I can with my brushes in Photoshop. So you can see in my sketch from Photoshop that it has that texture to it because of the brush that I used. But these lines, it's all pretty like flat, which I guess can be okay because, well, now I guess this is a good time to move into the other thing. So because when I was coloring this, I've kept it flat. So the final version of this animation that I have right now doesn't have any shading. And I don't know if I'm going to add that. I feel like maybe I should because the background's pretty well rendered. But at the same time, just having the flat character does kind of help it to stand out. But do I want it to stand out? Do I want it to fit in? I mean, even if I add the shading, doesn't necessarily mean it won't still stand out. I want to make sure that it feels like it's in that scene, I guess. So I'll have to think about that. But part of that problem is I don't know how to really do that in Animate. Like add my shading in with the way that I set up my layers. So if you recall, what I did was drew out my line art on 3 different layers. So body, hair, and towel. And then I duplicated that line art so that way I would have a copy of the original just in case I needed it. I duplicated that and then I used the paint bucket tool to fill in the line art. Because in Animate, that works so much better than it does in Photoshop. You don't get any like weird, like white space happening between the lines that you drew and the fill. So it works. That is another thing that I really like about Adobe Animate is that it helps to make it so much easier to color because as long as my lines are closed, then I can just click it and it's done. not all of my lines were closed though. So if you watch my other videos, you'll see that, I mean, I did realize in some parts that lines weren't closed that I did want to have closed. So I would just like go back and close it and then fill in. But that was really with the body. For the hair and the towel though, because both of those things are on top of the character, but in some sections they're also behind the character. So I didn't always want to have a hard edge where that would be. You know, like as you're seeing something come out from behind the character, I'd rather have it be just the fill color, except for like the very edges of the thing that aren't touching the character. So when I had to color those, then I would basically I would create that outline, but using my fill color instead of the line color, and then fill it in from there. And one thing that is nice, so pretty much the only brush setting I did mess with other than the size, is there's a brush mode that is called Paint Behind. So when I have my line art already on the layer, then when I needed to do those like outlining in the fill color, then I can do that and it will appear behind the line art wherever I need to kind of like draw over that. So that's really nice. At first I didn't see that option and so I was having to be like really careful, having to redraw my lines to make sure that I wasn't going too far over like the line art that I already drew. So with the paint behind, I don't have to worry about that. So that was really nice. Of course, if it's like the line art from a different layer, then I still have to worry about drawing too much over it. But anyway, that's just, you know, just problems. Just Brooke problems. So that was nice. But I just did that. And then, so my final layers are the line art with the fill. It's all in one layer, line art and fill. So I don't really know what the best way would be to approach shading, because I would need it to be on top of the fill color that I already put down, but below my line art. I don't think that's possible with how I did it. So maybe in the future, if I need to do it that way, then maybe I can just keep my fill and line art separate. But the way that I like to do it in Photoshop is to use clip masks. So I would have a video layer for the base color, and then I would just use clip masks to add my shading in. But I don't think that that's possible in Animate, which sucks because it's something I rely on a lot in Photoshop, even just for like illustration, like the background here. So much stuff is using clip masks for the color and stuff like that. So I have to figure that out. I might look up and see what do other people do to manage it. I don't know. Well, we'll get there. But overall, I like using Animate. I'm gonna keep trying and keep working with it and see where that takes me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to support my animation efforts, you can go over to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/CaraboAnimation. A big thank you to those in my deeps tier right now. D-Row, shout out. Thank you for supporting me. And I hope you guys enjoy your life. I don't know. Peace out.